So let's talk about foreign policy stuff. All right. Actually, talk about Daniel Webster first. Daniel Webster. What do we know about Daniel Webster already? We know that he went to Dartmouth.
He was a warhawk.
He was. Where was he from? Where did he represent? No, that's Calhoun. He represented the North, right? We talked about these three great senators who will be going forward, where Calhoun's representing the interests of the South. But what's Clay representing the interests of?
In the West.
Kentucky, the West, essentially, the West. And then Daniel Webster is representing the North. Daniel Webster was also a great writer, and he actually ghost wrote a lot of John Marshall's decisions. A lot of Supreme Court decisions are written by clerks. Have I talked about being a Supreme Court clerk in here before? Did I talk about it in here? If you go to law school, one of the greatest things you can do is to become a Supreme Court clerk, like clerk for a Supreme Court justice. It's usually only reserved for people who go to Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Stanford, Princeton maybe. I had a friend that had an interview. He clerked for the D.C. Circuit, which is the court right below it essentially. And he had an interview to be on the Supreme Court as a clerk, and he didn't get it. And he went to Duke. But you just write your ticket. It's a huge, huge honor. And he actually wrote a lot of decisions because you actually do a lot of the research. You write a lot of opinions, and then the Supreme Court justices, or anybody you clerk for, you'll write decisions, and then they'll go through it, and they'll add stuff, and you fine-tune it, right? Because they don't have time to write all these decisions all the time. So I wanted to know about that, but he was a pretty big influence. All right. Foreign policy. A couple things I want to talk about. During Monroe's presidency, does anyone know who our who our Secretary of State was? Does anyone know who our Secretary of State was? In fact, he was one of the greatest Secretaries of State we've ever had. And I'll give you a hint. He would become our next president.
Adams.
John Quincy Adams. Very good. John Quincy Adams was our Secretary of State. While he was one of the most useless presidents we had, he was one of the most useful Secretaries of State. He would later go on to be a congressman after he was president. In fact, he was the only president to actually go into elected office after his presidency. And he was a much better congressman than he was a president. And he used to act like he was sleeping in Congress, and then he would hear people talking around him, and he would pick up like inside information because he both thought that he was sleeping, and that's how he got his edge over people, that he would kind of lull them into a false sense of security. Yes, he's very tricksy, that one. But the first big treaty he's going to actually negotiate is the Rush-Bagot Treaty, right? I guess Hannah would say Bagot. I think it's Rush-Bagot Treaty. But this is actually between the United States and Canada. Really, between the United States and England. We were worried. This did two things. Number one, both the British and the Americans were worried about having an arms race on the Great Lakes. That sounds ridiculous today, right? Us and Canada duking it out on Lake Superior. But it was an issue before that. If you remember, a lot of the biggest naval battles of War of 1812 were on the Great Lakes. The Rush-Bagot Treaty essentially ended any kind of arms race. And what it also did was it secured the border between Canada and the United States on the 49th parallel, from Lake Superior all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Now later, this Oregon area will be another treaty, it's called the Oregon Treaty, will essentially fix these borders, but the 49th parallel, which we know today, is actually going to be set with the Rush-Bagot Treaty. And this allows us to not have to look at and worry about Canada. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal today, like we gotta watch those Canadians. They might be coming over at any moment. But if you think about it, the two wars we fought, a lot of them were in Canada, right? The War of 1812, before that, the Revolutionary War, British and the Canadians were part of that. And today it is the largest unguarded border in the world. Over 5,000 miles of border we share. If you're a terrorist, what's easier to get through, Mexico or Canada?
Canada.
It's always funny, everybody's like, we gotta secure our border with Mexico because that's where the terrorists come in. That's not where the terrorists come in. The terrorists go over here and they walk across into America. It's not hard to across. Literally, I think there's like 300 or 400 guards for the entire 5,000 miles between the two.
No.
Well, but those are on the Canadian side. The border is basically unsecured. I mean, obviously, when you go into Canada in your car, you have to get a check and stuff. But the rest of it is it's unsecured, and it's it's very, very peaceful. In fact, people always wonder this. Most people assume that who is our biggest trade partner? Who do we trade with the most? Who do most people assume? Do we trade with China? We trade with Canada way more. In fact, we get most of our oil from Canada. We get very little oil from the Middle East anymore. Do you guys know that? Mm-hmm. We get very, very little oil from the Middle East. We get most of it from Canada, ourselves, or Mexico, and other places. Until this treaty really helped do that. Also, the Treaty of 1818, also with England. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The Brest-Bagot Treaty was just about the Great Lakes. The Treaty of 1818 was actually about the border. That's my fault. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The Treaty of 1818 was about securing the border. That's my fault. All right, let's talk about Florida. Who owned Florida and had owned Florida forever? The Spanish did, right? And what was happening? Actually,
Is there a little map? It would be more likely to tell you to understand.
there we go. So the Spanish controlled Florida, but there were a lot of Native Americans in Florida, specifically the Seminole. Florida State of the Seminoles, right? The Seminole and the Creek actually were horrible. They actually used to be the same tribe and split a long time ago, and they were bitter rivals. That will be important later. But the Spanish essentially couldn't control the Native Americans from coming up into Georgia. And so Andrew Jackson, who was a general, went into Florida in what's going to become known as the First Seminole War. He was told, go in, defend our position, do not be aggressive. So what, does that sound like Andrew Jackson? No. The answer is no. What he did was, he went in, he captured several cities, he captured the Spanish governor of Florida, he got 2 Indian chiefs and executed them. And that was the First Seminole War. The Spanish were highly pissed at this. But this is the genius of Adams, okay? When you're talking about foreign policy, it's all about how much leverage you have, right? What's leverage mean? Yeah, like, in what position do you have to make your point, right? Yeah, if I'll give you a social example. What's one reason why the divorce rate's really, really high, a lot higher today than the 1950s? Well, we'll look at 3 of my friends here at school. Me, Cooper, and Ellis. All of us have one thing in common. Our wives make more than we do. In some cases, like Cooper's, quite a bit more than he makes, right? What is one reason, by now saying this, what's one reason why divorce rates are higher?
Women can have jobs now.
Because women have more leverage in relationships. In the 50s, we'll call it the good old days, men could do whatever they wanted, right? Men could stay out late. Now, my grandfather had 2 kids, literally never changed a diaper. Ever. But today, that's not the case anymore, right? Women have leverage. They have something, they don't have as much salute, right? They have some power. What leverage the Spanish have? Right? They're like, you can't do that in our land. And John Adams said, okay, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either you need to come and pay to put these Native Americans down, or you need to let us buy your land. And the Spanish were not in a position to spend a bunch of money. So guess what they did? Well, they sold the land. So in the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1919, America buys Florida. I'm not actually sure how much they bought it for. But the land was ceded to the United States. That's how we get Florida. because he knew that Spain had no leverage. What are you going to do about it? Right? In the 1950s, if a man cheated on his wife and she's really bad about it, she's a stay-at-home mom, she has no education, she has 2 kids to keep track of. All right, you want to leave me? What are you going to do about it? Where are you going to go? Right? Clark cheats on Jamie. What are you going to do, Jamie? All you are is a pediatrician. You can't possibly survive without my teacher check. Right? I mean, he's not going to say that. So, she has more leverage. I'm curious if Cooper ever watches this. That might be a little bit weird. All right, let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine. All right? The Monroe Doctrine is the basis for, literally, we still uphold the Monroe Doctrine. This is 1823. We still uphold the Monroe Doctrine. All right? Here is a map that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's a world map. There were a bunch of countries in Europe, specifically like Prussia, France, Russia, Austria. They did not like this spreading democracy. Why did they not like this spreading democracy?
To give their own people.
Yeah, they don't want it spreading in their country. That's a threat to their authoritarian regimes, whatever you want to, whether it's a monarchy or whatever, right? And so the Americans started getting kind of nervous about this. Now, were there European nations already in North and South America? Yeah. Spain was there, England was there, I don't know if Russia was there, but several countries were already there. So even though we had a very weak Navy and an even weaker Army, we issued the Monroe Doctrine. And it was really, really kind of gutsy of us to do this. Adams really wrote this, but it becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine because Monroe was president.
The Adams-Otis Treaty.
Do what?
It says Adams-Otis.
We've already done that one. What was the Adams-Otis Treaty? So we got to Florida. What the Monroe Doctrine said is this. Everyone else in the world, if you're already here, if you're already in North or South, if you're already in our continent, you can stay. But no one else is allowed in. You are not allowed to get any new land. Because we're here. Why is that kind of ridiculous?
Because we don't.
What are we going to do about it if the British want to do something, right? It'd be like me walking up to, Mr. Howard. Do you guys know Mr. Howard? No social studies teacher?
Yes.
He's not he's considerably bigger than I am, right? And saying, all right, you got 5 seconds to get out of my face or I'm dealing with you, right? Do you guys remember Mr. Turner? Big tall, 6'8" guy, former coach, and still coaches. Like, I'm not going to be like, Turner, you got 10 seconds to get in the way or it's going to go down, right? I wouldn't say that. But that's the sense of what America is saying. But here's the thing. What Adams knew was these countries are seeing that what's happening to the prestige of America. It's going up, right? We're starting to spread across this land. We're going to be in the future a powerful country. And if you are one of these other countries, what is your goal in terms of international relations? Yeah, maybe eventually you should be friends with America because it might help you in the long run against your enemies, right? So, ironically, no new country has ever come into this hemisphere since 1823 without asking us. And we still uphold it today. Other countries are gone now, and if you were there, you could stay. France could stay, Spain could stay, Britain stayed, but once they were gone, they stayed gone. And it has been our policy for a long, long time. John Quincy Adams goes down as maybe one of the 2 or 3 best secretaries of state ever. Secures peace with England, gets us our border, gets us Florida, establishes a policy that's going to last for 200 years. We are done. See, wasn't this better than hanging out?